welcome to another episode of Building Extraordinary Brands, where we explore the art and science of creating brands that stand out. Today we have a special guest who is a true master of logo design and brand design, and that's Allan Peters. Allan is the partner and chief creative officer at Peters Design Company, where he has partnered with iconic brands like Nike, Amazon, and Patagonia. You may have heard of them. He's also the author of the best-selling and award-winning book, Logos That Last, which is what we're going to talk about today. And he's also become the go-to resource for designers and brand builders around the world. Allan's work has been recognized internationally by prestigious organizations like Clio, ComArts, and How Magazine. With nearly 2 decades of experience, Allan has won numerous awards for his contributions to the design industry. And when he's not creating timeless logos, you can find him biking around the city with his 4 boys. In today's episode, we're going to dive into what makes a logo timeless, how logos play a crucial role in brand extensions, and Allan's process for creating logos that last. And we may talk a little bit about social media as well. We'll also touch on some of his upcoming projects and speaking engagements too. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Allan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jacob. Appreciate it.
We're going to dive straight into this. You wrote a book on this topic, timeless logos. So why don't we start off right there? What is a timeless logo in your opinion? What makes it a timeless logo?
Sure. Well, here, let me just take one step back. So I got contacted by Quarto, which is one of the biggest design book publishers in the world, to write a book. But when they contact you, it's not like they're like, well, just start writing it. They need to know what your pitch is. What's going to make your book unique and different from everybody else's? So why is my logo book different from Droplin's or different from Michael Beirut's? And so I had to write a whole pitch deck and then sell it up through their chain of command to their higher ups. And looking back, one of the things that I've always done my entire career is just so much research and studying the past and learning about the great masters and trying to not just learn from the teachers in school, but learn from these masters like Saul Bass and Paul Rand and Elvin Lustig. And gosh, there's so many talented designers that we can learn from that aren't even around today, and trends that we can learn from the past. But the thing that I think I valued so much about this work from the past, it wasn't that I liked all of it. I usually like specific pieces, and a lot of the times there were logos and marks and designs that still were lovely today, still had the same impact that they had 50 years ago. And it really influenced the type of work I did, because I was like, well, I want my work. I want my work to look good in 50 years. How do I get people to not want to update it every time the trend changes, right? How do I make my work so that it can stand the test of time, like one of Saul Bass's marks, and so I started unintentionally researching it early in my career, and I'd kind of been doing it my entire life, and all my work is kind of based on that strategy and that thought process. I spend so much time digging through antique stores looking for beautiful marks that may not have been done by famous designers of the past, but they're marks that are still beautiful today, and there were things in them that I could learn from. And so I thought, hey, maybe that's what I could write a book about. And I pitched the idea. And here's kind of the root of it. It's like, in this world where you can go on Fiverr and get a logo for next to nothing, why would you be willing to pay a Lander and Associates or a future brand multiple millions or potentially billions of dollars for a logo design? Why is there such a drastic difference? And why would you pay this much for this elite brand that, what are the strategies? What are the reasons? And I figured if I can really spell that out, not only in a book, but in my work itself, like when I'm pitching myself to a client, that way I can make it so that people are willing to spend more. I can reach those higher budgets because I can back it up with the strategy behind it as well.
Yeah. And you have a brand yourself then as well. Like those big brands like Landor and all that, they have a brand and a reputation as well.
They do. So I pitched this idea to my publisher, and they love the idea. And so the title of my book is Logos That Last. A little bit of alliteration in there because I like alliteration.
Yeah,
but basically, kind of the strategy behind creating timeless brand marks. So I dig into that. And so what makes the logo last? What does make it different than a trend-driven mark? I think there are basically a few strategic pillars, basically more or less. Do you want to get into that, or I can summarize it?
Yeah,
Do you want the
I think the
summary?
pillars are important. Like
All right,
maybe we
cool.
start with like why it's important for have it to have a timeless logo. Obviously there's the longevity
Well,
side of it, but then we can get into like the principles and the
sure.
key design elements.
Well, look at a company like Target. So I used to work for Target. I worked there for 5 years, and I was lucky enough to work on 2 rounds of their core branding, some of which they're still using in store. I designed the Target bags and a lot of the branding that you see around the store with the concentric rings and all that. And with that, it's all based off this beautiful, timeless brand mark. It's one dot and a ring, and then everything is pulled out of that. And you see that throughout the store. You see it even in the naming, like Target Circle. There's a circle in the logo, and that's why in that name it has that specific thing. And you see it in the designs, the rounded corners, the way they specifically use that spacing between the positive and negative stripes. There's so much that's taken from that brand mark. And if you were to redo the logo every couple of years, you would have to redo all that stuff, and it's all ingrained. And also, on top of that, over time, even if a mark is bad, it develops brand equity, right? And so the more and more that you see a logo, the more it gets ingrained in your head. And memorability is a big part of having a strong brand, because you want this. Basically, the logo starts as an empty vessel and slowly fills up over time with everything you hear about. So like Nike, everything from like some kid you saw in high school that had Jordans and you're like, man, those are sweet, or some commercial you saw, or some article you read about third world country sweatshops, or everything you know about Nike is dumped into this vessel, this logo, and it fills up and fills up and fills up. And usually that's a good thing. There's some brands that there's a lot of negativity attached to them, but in which case you might want to rebrand.
Okay.
But if it has a positive vibe to it and there's a lot of nostalgia to it, there's a lot of strength there to stick with the same mark, even if it's bad. And I'm not saying you should have a bad one. It's like, how do you get it so it's good? It doesn't have friction, like if let's say you have a gradient and it's hard to reproduce, or it
Mhm.
has a whole bunch of colors and you can't emboss it very easily. Whatever, all the frictions that can come with it. As long as there's not a lot of friction, it's simple. And it's nice if you can stick with it, because it becomes more and more powerful over time. It's like it levels up like an RPG game.
That'd be cool to
um,
see that grow on each logo. Like you're entering God mode.
exactly. It's kind of like that. And so I'll just walk through these. So the first one is time. The two mark of a long lasting brand mark is time, because over time, the brand equity builds up, just like we just talked about. Over time, you have repeat viewings. It makes it more memorable. It makes it stick in your head. I mean, that is a pretty obvious one. The second, and these first three you can't control. So you can't control time, and you kind of don't know if it's going to be a
You can
timeless
try.
brand mark until time has passed, right? The second one is the marketing budget. You can invest like McDonald's. Some people would say like, oh, that's a great brand mark because they've seen it so many times. Is it a great brand mark? It's fine. It kind of looks like French fries.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say it's like one of the best brand marks of all time, but it's definitely memorable because you've seen it so many times. It's in the architecture of the buildings. You've seen it on so many billboards for years and years and years. And a lot of that is the marketing budget, the amount of money that they spent on advertising. There's been so many ads for McDonald's over the years, and
You
it
just ask my
strengthens that.
3-year-olds. They definitely know it on the highway.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. The product quality, and that's the last one you can't control. They always say like you can't, in advertising, they always say it's like you can't sell a poor quality product. Like no matter how good the ad is, no matter how great your headline is, no matter how beautiful the design is, if the product is garbage, you know. So you can't control that. But if you have a really high quality product like Apple, gosh, the brand, how great does the branding have to be? And the branding's nice and simple, but like they don't really have to do that much because the product's so good. Like the iPhone is like it's such a superior thing. They could have a pretty lame brand, and I think they could get away with it because the product quality is so good. Yeah. So personal passion, I think with when you look at some of these old brand marks, like if you look at, I don't know, the NBC Peacock, beautiful mark, right? Got the negative space head with a little beak in there, and it has colors, but it's the same like shape repeated over and over again. It's lovely, lovely balance. beautiful, looks so good. The animations were like spreads the tail feathers. Holy cow. I
Yeah.
love it. Every last little bit of it.
I
But
finally found my other logo passion geek. Like I'm frothing over these little small marks. It's great to hear.
oh man. But you can see, like when you look at that NBC Peacock, you can see the passion put into that from the designer. So the personal passion that the designer pours into it, I think is clear in the final product. I think if the designer's having a good time, if the designer is loving it, the end result is it shows. And if the client's like making the project hard and the client and the designer just like give up, I'm done with this, and I'm just like let's just get this to the finish line, right? You can see that. You can always
Yeah.
see that in the final as well. So I think personal passion is a big part of it. That's something you can control. Universal beauty. People are like, oh, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Logos are subjective. I could put 3 logos on Instagram with a poll, and one of them's going to win. And I could just say, which is the prettiest?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
one of them is universally going to be more beautiful. And we could probably put that poll in 3 different places and get the same results. And just in general, there's certain aesthetics, whether it's balance, whether it's this balance of negative to positive space, just in general, there's a craftsmanship, there's being able to simplify and shave off the perfect amount of strokes where it tells just enough story, but at the same time, it's just so simple. It's just visually you can see that universal beauty. Again, I believe like the timeless brand marks, they got a good look to them. In a way, like you want to sport it on a shirt or a hat or get it tattooed on your body, whatever. You're like, this is a sweet mark, right? And
Yeah.
and they should be that. Originality, that's important. There's so many companies that fight over like, I have a circle for a logo, and then there's another company that has a circle for a logo, and but my logo, my circle's lime green, and yours is blue. Neither of them really win in the end. They're all like copying each other, trying to have a square for a logo or a ring for a logo or a circle. I think you gotta have it a little bit more original than that. We talked about friction. I think functionality is an important thing. It's got to work simple, one color if it needs to, so you can engrave it and die cut and do all the things you got to do. It's got to be able to work tiny, tip of a fingertip, favicon, any of these places where it's microscopic almost. You should be able to identify if it's too complex. It's not going to work if there's a gradient. It's not going to work if there's colors touching colors. Ain't gonna work. There's certain things that are gonna cause friction, and I always start when I'm doing logos. I always start black and whites and no typography, no color, just black, and sell the idea through, and then bring all the frosting to the cake. Start with the foundation.
We're a very similar process. I'm looking forward to tucking into that. And
Heck yeah,
these are some great traits. I haven't never really looked at it from some of those perspectives. And I've always
yeah,
thought about it as like simple and versatile
yeah.
and so
We've
forth.
got,
And I can see
we got,
it. No, I completely agree with you actually on a lot of it, which is awesome. I'm
yeah.
curious to your not favorite logos, but like some logos that are have endured over the years that you think are perfect examples of a timeless logo.
Sure, I got a list.
Let's do
Well,
it.
hold on. I've got 3 other traits.
Oh,
I
really?
think
Okay, I'll
let's
cut you
finish it
off.
off. Sorry, I got excited on that last one. It probably sounded like the final one. Okay, color palette. I think does play a big role. I think you can strengthen the mark with the color, like the NBC Peacock. I think that's solid color. It's fine, but when you add the color into it, it bolsters it. It makes it so much stronger. Story. I think this is one of the most important points at all in a timeless brand mark is that it doesn't have to be a lot of story. It can be like Nike swoosh looks fast, right? And I know there's like some Greek history and all that, but in general, it looks fast. And that's the story. That's fine. If you meet 2 people, one person's name is Bob, and the other person's name is Hawk. You don't see him for a year. You're going to remember Hawk's name over Bob's name because it has a story to it. And
Right.
the same thing goes for a good brand mark. Just a little bit of story makes it stick in your head so that you don't have to see it so many times before it's burned into your memory. And then the last one, which every designer knows coming out of school, is keep it simple. Fewest amount of brushstrokes. I always like when I get done with the logo and I'm ready to present it, I always look at it and I'm like, okay, if I got pitched this project 5 years from now to take this mark and simplify it and take it that one step further, is there anything else I could shave off? Is there any more ways I can simplify the geometry just to make it to tell the exact same story in a more elegant way? Okay.
Yep.
And then you would ask about his
Yeah, well, I have some follow-up questions now, so we'll definitely get to the examples.
Yes.
when can these rules be broken? Because there's others in camp of like the fab icon is not important anymore. It's more about the, I guess, having a logo suite that's versatile. Have
Yeah.
different sizes and so forth, or it doesn't have to work in black and white now because everything's digital. Like, what's your opinion on this? Like, I know we're talking about timeless logos here, but
Sure.
we're evolving in the logo world. So curious on your thoughts.
I think you're still going to want to be able to die cut your logo out of metal or whatever for signs. I think you're still going to want to be able to engrave it, emboss it in real life situations. I think you're going to be asked for one color logos in certain situations, or you want to be going to be able to make it white so you can knock it out. Maybe you're sponsoring some companies doing some event and 16 logos are put on their sponsorships and they want them all one color versions of it.
Hmm.
So I think having a one color option is always going to be something. I don't think that'll ever not be something that people want or demand, or it's going to cause friction if it's not there. And currently, you got to have your mark work really well as a social avatar. Most times you see a logo for the first time is going to be on a mobile phone, whether it's in social media or just in mobile in general. And it's got to be able to work tiny. It's got to be, and there's always going to be tiny screens and probably tinier, like whether people are looking at a watch or over time, it's going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you
Yeah.
can tell the story in the simplest way, I think all of these rules that worked in the past that still work today are going to continue working in the future. Can you break rules? I think like, let's say you're like, but I want to design some sweet logos with gradients in them. I think you can. I think you need to start with one color and then make your badass gradient version as part of the brand toolbox, and they all work together. I think that's start with the most minimal one color bare bones version, and then add to it, add the color, add the gradients, add the whatever emboss it, whatever kind of fanciness you want to get into with your logos, add it on afterward. But in general, start with that bare minimum. Always,
Okay.
always.
Well, we're going to get into the like brand extensions and your process as well. Like, do
Yeah,
you start with the logo and then expand, or vice versa, and so forth? But let's go back to that other question around timeless logos. Some examples. You have a whole long list.
I do. I do.
Let it
I'll
go.
I'll list off a few of like my favorites. I love the Burlington Northern logo. That's a train logo. It's gorgeous. Love the Saul Bass's version of the Girl Scout logo. CBSI, that one is timeless, man. They've had that the same forever. What a beautiful mark. The Target logo, the NASA worm, NBC Peacock, Canadian Broadcast logo. Love Acura, Volkswagen. I don't particularly as much love the newest, latest version of the Volkswagen logo, but it's still good. I just like the couple versions back.
Right.
A little quicker.
I'm seeing a
Um,
trend here. Are these from like I don't know when they were designed, but they sound like they're like the 50
but I
era.
mean, like the Mitsubishi logo with the three diamonds. How are you going to do that better? Like,
Yeah.
how can you refine that? Like, what are you going to do? Make them triangles? It's how are you gonna make that better? It's perfect. It's lovely the way it is, and not all these are like the final. Like, there's like I have stuff on here like I mentioned that are logos that aren't around anymore, but then there are like timeless marks that are still around. The Apple logo, the FedEx logo, the peace sign. How lovely a mark is the peace sign. I love the Electrolux logo, Hartford Whalers, International Harvester, New York Yankees. There's a lot of nice, like nice marks that have been around for a long time. And the three, you really have to break it all down to like the simplest three things that you gotta look for in a mark is that originality. It's got to be original. It's got to be as simple as possible, and it's got to tell a story. And usually it comes down to simplicity and storytelling. Like, how can you get that perfect balance on the scale? It's like if you add too much story, it starts not being as simple, and you gotta keep
Mm,
adjusting and tweaking until you get that perfect balance.
yeah, it's true,
My,
true.
my buddy
That's the
Nick,
challenge we have as logo designers. It's like, how do we get the brand story into that vessel, but not go
yeah,
overboard?
I was talking to my buddy Nick about it the other day. Nick Smazel, he's a creative director at Blue Dot, and he goes, and I love his design. I've been friends with Nick for I don't know over 20 years. He does very very simple design. He like really stripped down, and he said he's like I shave it off and I shave it off and I keep going simpler and simpler and simpler until I get to the point where I've gone too far, and I know I've gone too far. Like it's just like lost. And
Hmm.
then I pull it back, but not all the way to like comfortable. I pull it back to just a little scary, where I know my clients can be a little uncomfortable.
Okay.
But he's like, that's the magic point. It's like right there, right when you're just like the meter has gone just slightly past.
Okay. All right. I'll have to check out his work. I'm not familiar with it. What was his
No,
name?
he never posts anything.
Oh, right. Okay.
But he's good. He's a mega talented designer, and he just doesn't like dealing with all the social media and that
Okay.
nonsense.
What's his name? I didn't catch it.
Nick Smazel,
Nick
Nicholas
Summer.
Smazel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
he's
All
really
right. Thank you
good.
so much for sharing that. Now I want to hop into brand extensions, right? Like
Yeah.
first we'll just define what that is, just for people listening, and then how you approach, I guess, logo design and brand extensions.
Well, the way I like to define brand extensions, and a lot of people know me for this stuff, is I like to like once I have a defined brand mark, and the reason I start with the black and white is like, well, okay, we get nailed down to the brand mark that we love, and then when I have that with the client, then I dig into the geometry of the brand mark. The relationship from negative to positive space. If it's mono weight, if it has a thin to thick, it has two weights going on. It has sharp corners, rounded corners. If it's inlined, all of that brand language, all that geometry, I try and take that and start applying it to the typography. I love doing custom type that's inspired by the brand mark, so they feel like they're like almost like all glyphs that belong to each other. If I'm doing a badge, the outside, the shape of the badge. If I'm doing a system, I love when the icon system is inspired by the geometry of the brand mark. Its shape of business cards, basically everything, brand patterns. I love taking it like all the Target work a lot of people know me for, taking the geometry from that Target logo, the dot and the ring, and extending it out so that it's in all of the pieces. And that's kind of my bread and butter. If you
So, quick
ever heard the
question:
term,
do you always start with the logo first? That's like the center point, and then expand on it.
always, well, no, I mean, sometimes I get hired from, I would say 95% of the projects I've gotten in the last 10 years start with a logo. And it goes, which means that I'm not doing the same clients over. That means
Yeah.
I've always got new clients, always new faces, always meet new people, and always new relationships. And so that can be a little tricky, but that's what I love doing. I
Yeah.
love
Keeps
doing the
things
logo
interesting.
design. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard it. Everybody listening has probably heard it if you're in this field. When a client says make the logo bigger, and you're always like your eye roll. I remember seeing an ad for an advertising show from the '70s, and the headline was joking about making the logo bigger. People have been talking about this for over 50 years,
Oh, wow.
and the deep down strategy or the issue that the client is really saying is that the work itself, whether it's a poster, an ad, commercial, doesn't matter. It feels generic, like it could be for any brand, and that it doesn't feel like that specific brand. And so their solution, because they don't know any better, is, hey, let's just make the logo bigger. Maybe that'll make it feel more like my brand. But the reality is like, how can you get the brand voice, the brand colors, the geometry from the brand mark embedded in the DNA, the visual DNA of all of this, the brand identity, to feel like it couldn't be any other brand, that it is, Batchworks, it is Target, it is NBC, it's at a glance, and you couldn't even ever mistake it for another brand. And so that's kind of the idea behind my strategy for brand extensions, is to try and get that DNA from that brand mark in every piece.
Okay. So you're kind of talking about like a identity system in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're going about extending a brand and building out that system, like what are some challenges you face, especially when it comes to like simple marks? Often, there's not much there, but you have to create a whole brand identity around it. Like, how do you navigate that challenge?
I think the hardest part, the biggest unknown is the brand mark. That's when I spent the most time digging, and usually do probably 100 sketches per brand mark, where I'm just like digging in and just trying to find the best idea I can get to. And there's a lot of exploration. I always ask for 3 weeks with my clients for just that portion of it. And then
Mhm.
the rest of it, you know, usually it's like 1 week rounds, bam, 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 like the revisions and adding pieces on and stuff like that, and doing brand books. Because I feel like it's once you have that geometry and the brand mark, if you know what you're doing and you know what to look for, all the rules are kind of spelled out for you. Like it's like I know what I'm gonna do. Like when I have that defined brand mark, I'm like, I know I can think of like 10 brand patterns I can make out of this thing. I know exactly, like here's a bunch of ideas for business cards, and the ways I could execute it, and it's all there. It's all sitting in that in the geometry of the brand mark. Just like looking at it for a second, like, oh, like, we could try this, we could try this, we could try that. And I think a lot of that for me, I maybe it comes easier to me because this is like all I've been doing for 20 years, especially the last 10 years. I'm cranking out so many logo projects all the time. And a lot of designers get all mixes of projects. Like even like when I worked at Target, I would have like I branded a Zamboni, and then I was working on like a giant event branding, and then I was doing in-store graphics and signage and all over the place. But since I've been on my own, like I'm making logos. I'm making logos and brand books all day, every day, usually 3 to 5 projects at a time. And I do so much of it that it just, it's like I'm a well-oiled machine. I just I just crank it out,
Let's take you back for a little bit. Let's go back
Yeah.
to maybe earlier in your career. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to explore that brand mark and create like an extension of that brand? When you have a logo like Target, it's like it's a circle, right? It's like, what the hell do I do with this? But like, how do you navigate that as a beginner? Is it to
Sure.
expand on it?
Well, the Target has a dot that's 2 width, a negative space ring that's 1 width, and another positive space ring that's 1 width. You can draw it in Illustrator using a grid system in like 10 seconds. So like when I was working at Target, I never like opened up a Target logo file. I just draw it every single time because it took like 10 seconds to draw the damn thing in Illustrator. Just turn on Snap to Grid and a couple circles and use Pathfinder, and boom, I got a Target logo, and I'm ready to go. So what is the geometry that you can take from that specific mark? Well, you got circles, and circles can be a full circle. You could have the way you round something.
Just to interrupt, you're starting at the geometry all the time. So if someone was looking at a logo for the first time, you'd always look at the geometry, like the corners.
When I'm doing brand extensions?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, usually. Let's say, well, it depends. Like, let's say I'm working on a specific assignment. Let's say I'm doing an ad, right? The first thing I'd start with is I'm going to figure out like who the audience, all the stuff that you would do with an ad. I would do all the strategically, we'd explore headlines. We'd probably come up with, we'd always I've always, when I'm doing advertising, we'd always do like a manifesto. I work with a writer. We'd write like a page that was just like what was the driving force based off the brief that we were trying to accomplish. The writer might crank out a few headlines, and we'd kind of be sitting there, and then I would start, we would be sitting sketching out a bunch of ideas, that bring some concept into it and some visual into it. But then in terms of the design, then I'm going back to the brand mark, then I'm going back to the brand mark for, how I might crop my photos, how I might add visual elements into it. If there's going to be, let's say there's a border on the edge of the thing and it has rounded corners, like just subtle things. And it doesn't have to be a lot, and it doesn't have to be every last thing in it. Just little hints back. It's like little clues that you're leaving behind, little breadcrumbs throughout. And usually it's more subtle than blatantly obvious, hitting them over the head. But
what are some examples you mean when you refer to that?
So like which type of like breadcrumbs, are like where could you work it in?
So like
Okay.
I understand what you mean. I'm just trying to
Sure. So let's say you're
picking
picking a font and let's say like Target has their own font. They use that version of Helvetica that they custom made it's called Target Helvetica, and instead of having square dots, it has circular dots. It's like subtle things like that where they take in the geometry of the brand mark and embedding it into the typography in a subtle way. It's not like all the font, like all the O's are perfect circles and stuff like that, and all the lowercase e's are perfect circles. They're still based off Helvetica, but then there's like subtle things like they redrew the ampersands and just like tasteful things, tastefully. That's how they embedded it and did it in that way. So that's one way you could approach it. But I mean, you could pour yourself. You could pick a font. Like let's say you're picking from start. You could pick something that is more circular. You know, Avant-Garde has a very circular, has some very circular shapes in it. So does Gotham, has some very circular shapes. There's some specific fonts. If you want a slab serif, Allan Craft Pro has some nice, very circular shapes. Like picking fonts based off the geometry of the brand mark so that they feel like they pair well together. They don't visually clash. And the same way colors can clash. Like a font can clash with a brand pretty easily too. Or two fonts can clash together if they are too disparate or too close, I guess. You know, close but not the same.
Yeah. Yep.
All these types of things.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So
Sure.
what about some examples around, brands? Well, let's say you took away the logo.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are some brands in your mind that without the logo, they still are very much their brand?
Well, you could go to a lot of the marks that don't have brand marks, like Hulu. Hulu's almost like a color. You know, like people know that green more than they know the logo. I would say it's like Hulu green. That like people know that at a glance. It's almost like that is their logo. Going back to Target, just because we were just talking about it and trying to bring it full circle. There's a whole bunch of things that aren't. I know I use the word circle, but there's a whole bunch of things that aren't the logo that are almost a logo. You got the Target dog, you got the bags, you got the shopping carts. There's a lot of things that at a glance you're like, okay, that is the brand. What other brands have strong brands that aren't based off the logo itself? Gosh, Chobani, they have the logo's fine. It's a cool font, but I think overall it has like a vibe to the whole brand, the color palette, the aesthetic, the way they shoot their photography, all of it. It has a really cool vibe to it. And even, I would go so as far, even though, like, remember when Burger King rebranded not too long ago, and they went back to an old logo?
The retro
Like, is that old logo? I mean, it has nostalgia to it, but I mean, if you even were to pull that logo out of that brand system, all of it had such a warm and inviting and nostalgic vibe to it. I don't think you needed the logo to make that an awesome
vibe,
brand,
because that explains it, right? Like, you get a vibe of a place or a thing by looking at it. And if that vibe is wrong, or there's a disconnect, that's when you're like, well, whose brand is this? And you're just like, that's when you make the logo bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last example. I truly think there's so many things wrong with the Coca-Cola logo. But Coca-Cola is such a powerful brand. Number one, they have the marketing to back it up, and they've been around forever and ever and ever. But their brand, logo aside, is so strong that it doesn't matter that they got a script that, like, kids growing up these days aren't learning how to read cursive in school. They're like, they know what it is. and still it's iconic. They have the bottle cap version of their logo that has the script logo on a tiny little bottle in a circle. It's like, there's so many things wrong about, like, the way their brand is, but at the same time, it's a great brand. I think Coca-Cola is an awesome brand. And it's not because of the logo. I think it's everything else around it. Or even like the stuff that they were able to pull out, these subtle things, like the little swoop that they use, or like when they
perfect example of the geometry and examples of brand extensions, because they're literally pulling out little elements and twisting it and morphing it and cutting and cropping, and like they've had so many different iterations of their bottle and that logo. But it's all still so identifiable because of the unique script nature and the red color combined. It's like, it's so strong.
I personally, just from because I love script logos, and looking at the Coca-Cola, I actually really like it. I really like it, but it goes against like all the things that I talk about a timeless brand mark. It like breaks every rule.
We found your weak spot, Allan.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about your process. You've been refining this over the years, and I'd love to understand, how you go about creating a logo. I know you start with black and white, but let's dive in a little bit further.
Sure. I'm just going to start this off by saying that every designer has their own logo process, and what works for you is going to be the best thing. And you got to figure out yours over time. And I think the best way to do that is to read about a lot of different people's processes and listen to a lot of different people's processes, and then try different things until you find something where you're like, okay, I just hit the sweet spot. Now, a lot of people would hear about my logo process, and they do. They are like, you're crazy, Allan. Because not only do I do 50 to 100 sketches before I go into brand marks, then I make 15 black and white brand marks and present those. And most people are like, clients are so stupid, they can't handle that. I love bringing my clients into the process, and I'm big into I've worked for some amazing salesmen, and not salesmen in like a cheesy car salesman kind of way, but
Mm.
salesmen that are like, they, at the end of the day, you're like, man, I just want to hang out with you. Let's go like get a drink together and like just like you seem like a really cool guy. That kind of salesman. The salesman where you're like, they generally want to know about you. They generally want to connect with you, and they want to help you. You know, that's the kind of person you want to buy something from. And when I sell work, that's a big part of what I do is selling my client through the process and walking them through it, leading them, guiding them. I never send a PDF whatsoever, like, and then just say like, go ahead, pick it out, because they would get, if I presented 15 brand marks and send a PDF, they would they would have decision anxiety. But
Okay. I have a lot of questions, so, but I'll let
yeah,
you run through this.
okay, so really fast. I do 15. First, I start with a brand noun process. I sit with my client and I send over, I read everything I can about their brand. And then I come up with subject matter, not words, no adjectives, no verbs, specifically words that can be distilled down to an icon, trying to figure out what the subject matter for that brand mark is going to be. If it's going to be a peacock where each of the tail feathers are a different color because color television just took off, you end up with that. You know, that those, the two things you would put on there is like color, you know, like, or colored feathers or in peacock, you know, and those things will put together, right?
So are you presenting this to them like the
So
before
I walk
sketching?
into the process. I show them how, like, visually, and then I do a first round of brand nouns for them, like maybe 20 ideas of what their brand mark could be based off me just kind of learning everything I can about their brand. But then I ask them to also make lists because they know their brand better than I do. And one of the big reasons for this is coming from like working in this field for a long time. I know that every time you have to send a logo through the 15 layers of decision makers before it can get to the person who can actually approve it, all these people want to look like they're doing their job. And so they all want to put their stamp on it. And a lot of times that's their own revision that they're adding to it. And by the time you get to the top, the logo is not pure anymore. That brand mark has gotten distorted and it's not that great. So I love bringing them all, everybody who's a decision maker, get them involved at this initial phase, get them involved in the strategy, have them figure out what this brand mark is going to be. And so once I might end up with 70 words, and then I hop on a Zoom call with them and we narrow it down to 10 to 15 pieces of subject matter that make sense. Okay, it could be a tree, it could be a peacock, it could be a bell, you know, it could be all these things. And then I start combining it. Like once I have that approved list, you know, I'm like, oh, what does a bell look like with a peacock? What does a tree look like with a peacock? Those are like really weird
Yeah, I
combinations.
get it.
But you get what I'm saying, right? I started looking for visual overlap, and I got that in my book. I've got like, you can use negative space and looking for like overlap in geometry. Like I have a whole section on different ways to combine brand nouns together, different ideas. And so then I do my brand marks. I do 15 black and whites, no color, no typography, and each of them says right on them like this, you know, like you'll say the brand marks that I use. I'm like, okay, this is a bell combined with a peacock. I know I just keep saying that, and it's such a weird combination.
Yeah.
But each of them says what they are really clearly, so that at that point, even if I presented it to somebody, they might still have to share it to somebody else, and then they can easily go through this and see like, oh, the subject matter of each thing. Because sometimes certain things are subtle, like the arrow in the FedEx logo. You have to usually have that pointed out to you, and when you see it, you're like, oh, well, that's clever, you know. Mm-hmm. Like, aha, I see it now. I love that logo. And if somebody didn't point it out, you just be like, what? It's just words, you know. Yeah. And so I think it is important at that early stage to spell out like, here's what's going on. And then we narrow it with my client. We narrow it down to 3 that they feel good about. Then I add color, and I add typography. The nice thing is I have brand marks that are like pretty solid then.
So one question around the 15 marks. You mentioned you guide them through it. At this point, are you like getting feedback, or are you like trying to push them in like a certain direction of those 15, or what's happening there?
I present them, even though they're vectors, I present them as, I call it a deck, sketches and ideas. And the whole point is I want to get them to land on 3 of them. 3 of them that they feel like to have like a nice positive vibe, that there's legs, And then
Um,
I say no revisions yet. Then I do color and typography, and I usually do a brand pattern. I love mocking up on a hat. Would you wear it? I think that's a
mm,
big thing in a mark. Like if you walked out, like let's say you worked at, I don't know, Noodles and Company. I don't know if you have those out where you have, but it's a pretty lame logo. And let's say you worked at Noodles and Company, you'd probably take your hat off or your uniform off before you went to a party after you left to work, right? The teenager or whatever, they're not going to sport their Noodles and Company hat out in public. I want to create marks for my clients that they basically that solve the creative problem, work great for their target market, but at the same time, they feel cool as hell wearing. I want them to love it. And I think you can have really, really clever logos that people are like, oh, that's great, and gets a ton of Instagram likes and stuff like that. But you actually like try and sell it on a piece of merch and nobody buys it, right? Because it's just like, it's like a funny joke. It's really funny the first time you hear it, and then the next time you're just like,
yeah.
like I've heard
All
that
right.
before. And so I get them narrowed to those three, and like I said, it's like I add the typography based off the brand mark. I'm picking the colors and colors that will strengthen that brand mark.
So you're not exploring type at all during the 15 marks. You're
no,
just working on the symbol first.
just brand marks, just
Okay.
brand marks. That way I can explore further rather than, gosh, if I was doing systems for 15, holy cow, that would be like, not only would that be so much work for me, it'd be so much work for the client just to take that all in. Holy cow, they would probably, their head would explode. They might start crying halfway through and be like, I just gotta go. It would be so complicated. It would be like
Yeah.
a 3-hour long meeting.
And then they like want to swap and like, I want that font on this
No,
mark. Yeah.
I go through the 15 pretty fast. Usually we can do it in a 20-minute long meeting, something like that. I go
Okay.
through all of
Wow.
them. I say like no comments till the end. And then I get to the end and then I have a page with all 15. And I say, before we jump into this, I love to keep all the comments positive. I know you probably hate at least 5 of these, but let's talk about the ones that you do like. And I like to ask if there's like a bunch of people in there. Let's say I'm dealing with like a CEO and like all their underlings, and the CEO is going to be the only one who can call the shot, the elephant in the room. I usually will ask everybody to write down 3 that they would pick if they had to pick, and then go around the room and everybody says the ones they like, and the alpha always goes last because they want to see what everybody else says first, and then when they hear all the positivity, usually people tend to pick a lot of the similar ones. Then the CEO will come there in the end and be like, based off everything that everybody said, even if they were going to be negative, or even if they really liked a really weird one that nobody else likes, usually they'll change and they'll adapt their answer to make sure that like they're pleasing all their
Wow.
all their top tier employees. It's funny. It works really good though. And I've done this strategy with all like huge boardrooms and like people like millionaires and billionaires and stuff like that. And this technique, just keeping it positive and trying to like work your way, because if you don't say that, what happens? Usually the top tier alpha jumps in and they just start complaining about the stuff they don't like. And then everybody else is like, yes, I hate that too. And they're like, yes, boss, I hate that too. And it just ends up awful.
Funny how that works.
You don't want to do that.
Oh. Yeah, that is crazy in my mind. Like 15, like are they polished logos or are these like is there a mix of sketches or are you vectorizing all of these?
I'm vectoring. I used to do rough sketches and then I do detailed sketches and present those. And then I switched it up and I started doing vectors, just because sometimes a sketch doesn't translate. Sometimes you're like, that looks really good, and then you actually make the vector version. You're like, nah, it's not it. I don't want to end up with an kind of look. I want to make sure that whatever I'm making is going to be the best damn thing I can make. I'll make every project my best project, because that's what's going to get me that new business. That's what I'm going to share on social media, and people are going to say, hey, Allan, I want you to design my logo. So yeah, I don't care if it's for, in my book, I have online obituary, a logo for online obituary. And you'd think like most designers would be like, I'm like, that's like, make the money and get out the door. I don't want to work on that. And it's one of the best brand marks I've ever made.
Wow.
Love it. I love it. It's beautiful. It's for a company called Epilogue, and it's a book opening up, and the inside pages look like a E. I love the way it turned out. It's beautiful, and I truly think that it doesn't matter what company you're working for. You can make an amazing mark every
Yeah.
time for any of them, any of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. You just have to do the exploration, right?
Yeah,
It's to do the work. I'm
that's
gonna
right.
ask one question before we get into social media, but
Yeah.
on the opposite end of like presenting 15, have you ever presented like a one concept approach?
You know, I have, you know, it's tricky with that. You know, I think you kind of gotta sell it that way. And to be honest, let's say you're doing like a pro bono project or something like that. When I'm
Mm.
doing something that's either it's for like a really low price or for nothing, I usually talk about it up front with them, be like, okay, listen, I'm doing this because this is a portfolio piece for me. I'm going to do this because I want to, you know, like, number one, I want to help you. And number two, I want to make sure that, you know, I get some new business based off this. And so rather than going through this gigantic process, I'm going to show you what I think is the best for you. And if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. But that's basically like get approved upfront. Be like, do you want to do this or not?
Love it.
And so that they kind of know what they're expecting. And so they don't think that like they're going to start like doing 15 rounds of revision on a
Yeah.
pro bono project because that's not what it's about, right? So there's
Yeah.
that. There's sometimes I'll talk to a client and I love what they do. Like I had a client. It was a I talked to him. It was a buddy's brother, and he was based out of Texas, and he had a small church, like a house church, where they're like a lot of refugees and stuff like that, and people new to our country, and like a lot of gosh, just like a whole mix of people were coming to him, and they might not have shelter or place to stay. They might not have mattresses, or just like need some basic necessities and stuff like that. And his church was all about like it was like helping us, like getting together. The guys would get together and they'd help out all these different families and just use their gifts. Right, what they were doing was awesome. And obviously, like the guy is not like some millionaire or anything, like next to nothing. And we got to hear his whole story, and I wanted to help him, but obviously, like the budget was super small. And I'm like, listen. He told me the name is called Loving All People, A P. And I heard the name, and I was like, oh, I got an idea. And I sketched out this. There's three hearts. One basically just rotating a heart where it looks like an L, looks like an A, and looks like a P. And I sketched it when we were on the phone with him, like in the pitch. I'm like, listen, I don't know if I can do it for this budget, but like, if you like this idea, I'll make it for you. And I sent him that sketch, and he's like, that's awesome. And it's one of the cooler marks in my whole portfolio. And it's just like a sketch that I made on an initial call. I only showed him one sketch, and he was just like, yeah, let's make it. And I didn't end up spending a ton of time working on it. Sometimes it happens, you know, sometimes, you know, a lot of the times you don't get it right away in that first idea. Sometimes
It's
it's
that
the
light bulb
100th
moment,
idea.
right? It's like that's when you know you have it and that goes off, it's like it's a eureka moment. And it's
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's part of the success with your social campaigns recently, like your reels you've been doing. It's just like been sharing that eureka moment. Do you want to have a
Yeah.
little chat around that?
Yeah. So people have asked me, like in interviews and stuff like that over the years, they're always like, "What is your favorite part of the logo design process?" Like that's you hear that question a lot. They're like students, they have to do an essay. They're like, "What is your favorite part of the logo design process?" Or not even like the logo design process, like of your job. What's your favorite part of your job? And a lot of people would be like, "Oh, it'd be like the moment, like you know, you get to see the billboard go up, or like the final thing." It's like that moment, or like or the moment like you see the success, and like you see like the product selling in store. Or I remember I had a teacher told us, he was like, you know, you've made it when you see when your design's in the trash. And like you just like somebody discarded it. Like it was like maybe that's the moment for you. But for me, it was always the moment when you're sketching and you might come up with so many ideas, but you come up with one where you're like, snap, that's it. That's the one. That client's gonna love this. And they do. And like when you get to it in the presentation, they're like, they like stop, like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
that's it. And sometimes like that
Yeah.
happens in a presentation. Like I had one, this FM logo, I presented it, and we got to the one, it is funny because that one was like literally like the first sketch I did. And I got to the one that they picked, and the client's like my whole process, like they pick three and then I'll do more. And he's like, client's like, that's it. He's like, you don't do the other ones. Just
That's
spend the
awesome.
time doing some mock-ups or something. I
That's
don't
what
know.
you love as a
Yeah.
designer. It's like, yep,
Yeah.
tick. Oh,
Yeah, and
cool.
so
Well,
that moment, it's hard to share that. It's and a lot of the times, like on social media, people share just like here's a finished product, and that's what I had done for years. Like here's a case study, or here's my process. I make 15 brand marks, then we narrow to 3, and blah blah blah. Like we just talked about. The funnest part is like that moment when you solve it and you're like, wow, and you're so stoked. So that's this latest group of reels that I've been posting where I'm taking logos, some that are for my own clients and some that are just like, hey, what about this idea for this other one? And just like having fun, trying to see if is there room for improvement? Is there a little eureka moment? And then sharing that, with a lot of time I'm using cut paper or some sort of a simple tool that's not on screen, but that's tangible for like
mm,
showing how I could solve the process. People are just loving it, and it's not just the designers. I'm getting all the normal people. The normal people are enjoying them as well. So yeah, it's been really cool seeing the
no, it's been
explosion and
great to
growth.
watch, and they're very engaging. Just seeing how the thought process, but also that eureka moment and the storytelling that goes with it, I think is really what's makes it universally appealing, right? And it's kind of it hooks you in right at the start. It's like, well, what's the end result here? I want to see it, and you
Yeah,
keep watching. So,
yeah.
congratulations on the success
Thanks,
there,
man.
and sharing your process.
Yeah, I think that's a big part. So I've been trying to figure out how to do reels for years, and I've tried all sorts of different I variations. I think a big part of it is, like you said, it's like get them curious at the beginning. Like, how do you get them to watch the whole thing? And usually you like start with a problem. You're like, here's something that you know and love, but here's a problem with it. How are we going to fix
Mm,
that? Here we solved it, and then here's the result. And people want to kind of like figure it out,
yeah,
hear how it ends, and you tell a nice story like that. You share that aha moment, and then I've got like the moment I solve it, I have like a little like the music kicks in, and you're
yeah.
like,
No,
yeah,
you cracked the code. It's
yeah.
brilliant.
So it's been fun.
Alan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Before we wrap up, I'd love to just hear if you have any events or anything coming up where people can get your book and where people can connect with you.
Sure. With how successful my reels have been, my book sold out on Amazon and Target, but you can still get on Barnes and Noble, and you can still get on Books a Million. If you want to wait around a little longer, there's another printing that's happening September 1st. And so
Awesome.
I think it's on the fourth or fifth printing right now. And so it'll get back on Amazon and stuff like that. The price is a little cheaper on Amazon. It's not full retail. Usually they have it for like two-thirds of the cost. So you save a couple of bucks if you wait around a little bit. I shouldn't say that, but you should. But what else? I'm doing a couple of combinations where I'm like doing a keynote talk. I'm doing a workshop, book signing, selling merch and hats and posters and stuff like that. And I'm doing one down in Dallas, near the Fort Worth area, and that's a conference called Circles. That's coming up pretty soon here in October, beginning of October. That'll be a fun one. Ishmael runs that, and he's awesome. I did Circles back into 2018, and just awesome design community down there. If you're anywhere down in the South Central area, it's worth checking out. There's some great speakers that'll be there. And then next April, I don't know if it's like officially announced, but I've been talking about it. I don't care. I don't think Mike's going to throw me under the bus or anything. But I'll be doing Creative South next April, and I
Amazing.
am so excited about that. When I
Man, I
talk
wish
to
I could
Mike,
get there. It's one of those ones I never got to when I was living in the
well,
States. But yeah, it
it's a
looks
good
really
one.
fun.
It's a good one. I did Creative South back in 2012, and I pretty much like basically crying on the stage because I was like, I just in 2009 I had been shot, and I went through like a ton of drama, and it was like my first, like one of my first big talks where I'd gone out there and got on stage, and there's something about Columbus, Georgia, and that crew down there in that area specifically. There's people who come up from Florida. There's people who come down like over from Atlanta and stuff like that. There's a lot of awesome creatives that come to Creative South, and it's usually packed, and the lineup's amazing. Mike Jones is like best host, and such a sweet, good Christian dude. He throws this giant bridge party where like people do they have like a
You make me
competition
very
where
jealous right
people
now.
paint canvases. It's called like ink jam or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's so cool. And it's just like a big party on a bridge, and then all the talks. It's one of the best conferences, and I'm so stoked to be going back and to seeing all my buddies. Because a lot of people who go there every year, and so it's like a family reunion kind of.
Oh,
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy your time there, Alan. Thank you so much again for carving out some time for this, and congratulations on all the success. And
Thank you.
all the best. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate it, and it was nice talking to you. And hopefully you can make it out one of these conferences in the States at some point. I'd love to meet you in person and shake your hand.
Likewise, Alan. Likewise.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Building extraordinary brands.